What's the good word, y'all? DKB here. Appreciate you guys joining. So, the New York Jets, we've been exposed. It wouldn't be the first time this season, but against the Detroit Lions, it feels that much worse and definitely a lot more disrespectful. And we'll kind of dive into that in the video. But for one, I'll put it out there. It's not terrible because it's the Detroit Lions and they're generally a bottom feeding team. I actually think they're very underrated this season. They put up multiple 40 plus point games. They're on a 6-7 game win streak now, and you're kind of seeing them piece things together. But they've definitely had pieces littered throughout the roster, both offensively and defensively. So you kind of almost get a little bit of a parallel feeling between the New York Jets and the Detroit Lions. We're just on two different ends of the spectrum, with us falling apart when it's most critical in the second half of the season and the Detroit Lions picking up steam. Now, with that out of the way, what the Detroit Lions did to us was to steal Stephen A. Smith's word, blasphemy. Very appalling, and it was a very aggressive mindset, right? So if we want to start with the New York Jets, offensively, we had plenty of problems. At the core of it was definitely Zach Wilson. Still a lot of meat left on the bones, to steal Robert Sala's words. Still a lot of work that's going to be needed from Zach Wilson just to run a consistent, effective offense. So that is what it is. But when we want to take a look at the ground game and Zach Wilson not really being able to get help whatsoever, there's a mindset to this, but just to kind of get some things up front. So 22 rushing attempts, we only come out with a whopping 38 yards, and I was checking out X Factor. All 38 of those yards came after contact. So one, the offensive line was doing a very porous job being able to open up these lanes and these gaps and working their assignments in order to help facilitate a rushing offense. Two, it left the running backs with zero room for error in terms of being able to try to have consistent yardage or break off a big play. So what the Detroit Lions did was they stacked the box against us almost the entirety of the game. Basically, stacking the box means that they had 7 or more defenders within the tackles, within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And so every time a running back is getting ready to, take the field, and we understand it's going to be a run play from the New York Jets side of things, they already have to go in thinking, will my offensive line be able to block effectively on this play? And that's just the first half of the issues. If they do, we're still talking about being outmanned, anywhere from 2 to 3 defenders, depending on if we kept a tight end in line, and a bunch of other factors. So not only do you hope that things go well just in the first second of the blocking being opened up, two, you have to already kind of consider what kind of moves you're going to try to put on the defenders so that you actually have a chance to either break off a big play or get consistent yardage. And knowing that you have a free man or 2 men that are going to be able to penetrate and cause some problems right away is pretty concerning. So I can't really blame the running backs when you put when you put it in perspective under that lens of what they're going to be dealing with. And then with Zach Wilson at the helm, the Detroit Lions basically said, you're going to have to beat us through the passing game, and we're betting that you aren't going to be able to. And I say that because 18 of those 22 rushing attempts had 7 or more defenders in the box. I want to say we ran 58 plays, something like that. So we're talking about they fully sold out to stop the run and make that a very minimal impact, which they did an excellent job with that goal. And Zach Wilson just couldn't do the consistent chain yard moving, collecting first downs. And, historically, he hasn't been that guy. So it's not really as bold of a game plan as I mentioned, per se. It's just a smart use of attacking an offense that definitely has more problems than little when it comes to Zach Wilson manning things. And that's not necessarily a detriment to him, in my opinion. It's just where he's at right now. He's not going to be able to get the job done 9 times out of 10. So when we take a look at Zach Wilson in that regard, just in this season, We're talking about him being responsible for 253 first downs. It sounds great, but that only ranks us 25th in the league. Excuse me. We have 253 total, not including Zach Wilson, or not because of Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's responsible for 70 of that 253, and only 7 of those came on the ground. So we're not talking a game manager, a quarterback, whatever. But when you want to put Zach Wilson out there, he's not the guy that's going to be known for having strong series, or even play to play, smart, consistent, progressive, progress throughout the course of a game. Is very much so very hot and cold flashes, and we seen explosive plays and all that kind of good stuff, but we definitely needed the first downs. We needed to keep the defense on the field to have them gassed, and even though we had a lot of big plays, there definitely should have been bigger games by the likes of a Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore, and even a Braxton Berrios to a degree, and we'll kind of talk about why in a minute here, but that's the backstory on it with Zach Wilson, and I think this is the game plan that a lot of people are going to copy and paste immediately, especially the Jaguars coming off a short week. They have some issues in the cornerback room, and we'll kind of dive into that as well, but we're going to be facing a lot of single high safety man coverage looks from here on out. And until Zach Wilson just has an absolute dominant game from start to finish, I doubt any of the remaining 2 teams, the Dolphins and the Seahawks, are really going to, bat a second eye at having to be concerned about Zach Wilson and changing up their game plan immediately and playing more zone coverage and different things like that. So getting into the wide receivers, when we take a look at the stats so far, statistically speaking, the 4 best wide receivers we have against man coverage, which is, as we just mentioned, would be what we'll probably see more often than not, is going to be Garrett Wilson, followed by Braxton Berrios, Corey Davis, and then Elijah Moore 4th. It was pretty interesting to me when I checked them out, and I actually grabbed these from a player profiler. I couldn't see a whole lot via anything else, so it was the closest thing I had to wide receivers that had win rates. But Garrett Wilson makes a whole lot of sense. Braxton Berrios actually makes a lot of sense as well, especially if you rely on his game film from last season and the fact that he plays purely out of the slot, meaning he's not going to have a lot of press man coverage. The dude's very shifty, great acceleration. So, combining some of the natural attributes, the smooth footwork, the various things that he does, that makes a whole lot of sense. But I thought Elijah Moore would either be 2nd or 3rd. To see that Corey Davis was slightly better than him as well was interesting. So Garrett Wilson wins on 35.3% of his routes versus man coverage. I was a little bit confused on if this was supposed to include man and zone coverage, but if it's just man, that ranks him as the 55th best wide receiver in the league. Braxton Berrios ranks 33.9%, or has a 33.9% win rate. He ranks 65th. Corey Davis ranks 88th with a 28.8%, and Elijah Moore ranks 91st with a 27.8%. So, irregardless, we're talking about solid second tier wide receivers essentially across the spectrum in our wide receiver core room. We're still also talking about various issues with them having to deal with Joe Flacco as their quarterback, Zach Wilson, and obviously both of those quarterbacks have a pretty long monologue list of issues for why they either aren't a fit in the offense or why their poor skill set has led to the downfall of some of our games so far. And then we have Mike White, and I'm sure if we go back and just look at the 3 games that Mike White has played for us this season, that those numbers will skyrocket a lot higher. So, irregardless, those are our 4 guys we're looking at. Denzel Mims hasn't been able to log enough time to necessarily factor into that equation for us. And then we're talking about guys like Jeff Smith that are just starting to get sprinkled in due to some issues in the injuries, with Denzel Mims having the concussion and Corey Davis having the concussion, etc. But either way, we're talking about guys that have a strong enough skill set to where on average, more times than not, they should be able to win against man coverage, especially Garrett Wilson, very shifty guy, Braxton Berrios, all of the things they can do with him. And then same, goes for Elijah Moore, except to a higher degree. So we should have toasted the Detroit Lions this game, considering what they did. I'm very much expecting that we try to pull that off against the Jaguars, but those will be the guys to key in on: Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Braxton Berrios for us. We'll see if Corey Davis comes back. And then when you take a look at the Jaguars, as I mentioned, they have somewhat of some cornerback issues, right? Shaquille? I want to say it's Shaquem. I'm going to say it's Shaquille. Shaquille Griffin, he's been on IR. He's had some back issues. And so we're talking about facing a cornerback group. If they try to implement the same game plan that has Tyson Campbell, and he is legit a top 16 cornerback in the league. The guy's been phenomenal. Currently has an 87.9 when targeted. Passer rating wise, only game he's even allowed over 50 reception yards for was against Michael Pittman, and that was 52 back in week 6. So the guy's definitely been on a very, very strong tear. I want to say not too far from Sauce Gardner, but I definitely think they're a little bit in different leagues. When you talk about a top 15 cornerback versus top 5, things tend to look a little bit different, even if the numbers aren't necessarily extremely far apart. But irregardless, Tyson Campbell is definitely a strong candidate to potentially nullify at least one of the wide receivers. But we're talking about a rookie in Monteric Brown, who's only played in 8 games. He just started getting some time in week 9. And then they just moved up Gregory Jr. There we go. So we're talking about a cornerback room with 2 rookies, Tyson Campbell, who's very strong, and then Darius Williams, who I kind of like as another underrated guy as well, but he's up there in age. So, youth versus experience argument, we'll kind of figure out what wins there. But it'll be interesting. I'm definitely hoping for the best. There are a couple of things that we'll see if Mike LaFleur adjusts to. Maybe he wasn't expecting the Detroit Lions to absolutely go all in on that kind of defensive performance. But if he wants to get prepared for it, there are some ways for us to try to counter, having some stacked boxes. We can shift to some multiple wide receiver sets where we have them aligned on the same side. That'll force somebody like a safety to have to come down and try to implement a little bit of zone coverage to minimize and reduce any kind of impact that comes from, letting a wide receiver just run free. That'll be a little bit difficult because you'd have to imagine we probably try to counter the box as well with having 2 tight end sets. That also still works to our advantage, though, because that should open up play action. And what play action will do is, you don't want your cornerback necessarily matched up against a tight end 9 times out of 10, unless you have a Sauce Gardner or some kind of other eraser like that. And so this opens up either ample room, just free space for a cornerback to have to try to, compete against a tight end. If the tight end's able to do anything, if he happens to be shifty, if he can just run through him, then there's really no, final, standard defense. The safeties have been drawn in. The cornerbacks have been playing man coverage. The single high safety is really going to be the only other guy. And again, in general, most people don't have a safety that they can match up and win against a tight end more often than not. We luckily have 2 solid to above average tight ends, depending on how you feel. Conklin's hands haven't been the best this season, but still he's putting on one of the best performances we've seen from the tight end unit for us for a while. He's definitely still, if I remember correctly, having a top 12 tight end season. I'll have to fact check that one, but irregardless, CJ Uzomah is still the guy that we brought him in to be a yards after catch beast. And irregardless, even if we don't have the big plays, the yard after catch ability when defense is playing the way they are with stacked boxes should definitely be on full display the entire time. And then one of the simple ones, me and Gunny have mentioned this, Gino have brought it up. It's been like this for weeks, but this might be the time where that makes the utmost sense. And this is just frankly calling more slant plays. And this feeds into the yards after catch discussion that we've been having. This feeds into the fact that there's not going to be really a final line of defense if you have players that can win in short yardage distance right away. This is pretty much a surefire way to get somebody like Zach Wilson, if he can hit on them, of course, which will be the big question, in a rhythm. It opens up plenty of opportunities for plays to spring free a little bit. So maybe you have some busted coverages. Maybe the guy just gets completely beat. He falls, he slips, etc. This opens up a world of possibilities for somebody. And so that'll kind of be what I'm looking for. For one, can Zach Wilson be a little bit more consistent in terms of targeting the right guy, taking advantage of these man coverage looks, and will Mike LaFleur counter these stacked boxes? The run defense, the only way I really see us being able to get that on track is if Zach Wilson shows that he can be somewhat of a threat in taking advantage of the opportunity. Garrett Wilson should be able to win frequently. Elijah Moore should be able to. Braxton Berrios. Even if you want to design certain plays to schematically only get one or two guys open, still, we should have the advantage there from the numbers standpoint. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are. How do you see the New York Jets probably countering these stacked defenses? Or who would you like to see, I guess, kind of break out in the event that we do see Zach Wilson, I guess, step up against the Jaguars? It's looking like it's going to be a very interesting game. And the Jaguars are also fighting for their division, so we're not talking about a team that necessarily is just looking to roll over. But again, let me know what your guys' thoughts are just in general, and I'll catch you again. Peace.